Persona 4 again. Really, Atlas? We could have Persona 6 by now. What's your problem? We remade the whole thing. What? What the? And that's how 250 bones left my bank account. Wait, am I the problem? Video game remakes and remasters too, but this title looks neater, are a very hot topic of debate and have been especially controversial over the past few years. And extra especially because of how goddamn many there are, oh my god. But ooh, when a certain remake or remaster gets its hooks in you, suddenly that desire to complain about their existence really seems to dissipate. Look man, we haven't had a great pirate game since the original Black Flag. The closest thing we had was a shits and giggles Yakuza game, but no one ever listens to me when I say that was good. You know why remakes are made in the first place, like you don't need me to go over that again. I'll drop a subtle hint on screen for those who snow and those who don't snow. I'm so clever. You'd think with how divisive remakes and remasters seemingly are with the average gamer, you know, if your perception of the average gamer is limited to social media and you haven't seen a tree for at least 4 days, it's dads. Wait, that implies gamers have sex. That companies would simply get the memo that they were deeply unpopular. But remakes and remasters sell gangbusters. People buy them all the time, regardless of internet discourse. But it's foolish to write off internet discourse in its entirety just because the average consumer isn't bothered, though. The average gamer online raises some thought-provoking questions sometimes. I, too, needed a game theory video to understand if the pyro from Team Fortress 2 was actually gay. Many remakes and remasters are often unnecessary, with some people going as far as saying all remakes and remasters are unnecessary. There's a long list of reasons why many people dislike remakes and remasters, but that seems to be what everyone likes to focus on. All the reasons for why someone might like or want a remake and remaster is usually just chalked up to nostalgia, which yes, does play a significant factor, but I find this dichotomy pretty interesting, especially when you remember there have been a good few remakes and remasters in recent years that many have made an exception for, myself included. I mean, any new Fallout content in the current year is gonna turn a few heads, that shit is mind-blowing, but I do find it interesting that majority of people don't seem to be protesting the Fallout 3 and New Vegas remasters that got announced recently, especially given Bethesda's glorious track record. In this video, I want to discuss what I perceive as the war on remakes and remasters. I mean, hey, it's better than hearing about that other war every fucking day. I want to talk about the arguments for and against remakes and remasters head on, and then talk about the remakes and remasters that either bastardize the original, replace the original, the ones that do both, the ones that are just slightly held back from being truly exceptional, and even the very few that I think might actually be kinda justified in their existence. Sounds like heresy, I know, just let me cook. I think there's a balanced, nuanced, and calm discussion to be had here. At least that's what the worms inside my brain tell me. They're also telling me to tell you to like, subscribe. You know, this Nemesis fella is pretty intimidating, but I'm feeling a bit too much friction with these choices and these tank controls. Yes, this is much better. Alright, so, why do people hate remakes and remasters so much? A big point of contention with a lot of remakes is that they're frequently considered a bastardization of the original, remaking the game from the ground up or remastering it in a way that goes against or flat out disrespects the original's intent. And that can be anything from changes to the lighting and graphics, art direction, the feel of the gameplay, the writing and story. If there's a big change to basically any element of the original game, then people will always put it under a microscope and debate about whether or not the original intent has been bastardized and their childhood has been ruined, and why is there a gold trail of light leading to the exit of the dungeon, Atlas? This is often what a lot of people get hung up over with remakes and remasters. Even the more critically acclaimed and beloved ones often get this critique levied at them for straying too far from the original. Hey guys, my name is Phil. I'm an art director at Bethesda Game Studios. Now what you want to do is you want to grab the color picker tool and just make the environment brown. You know, you see that? Kind of an objective improvement. I have half a mind on this. On the one hand, the shock of seeing a remake stray so far from the original is guaranteed to be alienating at first. I want the sleeping table to blow my shit smooth off, but I also think it does largely depend on how well executed the changes themselves are. If you're someone who simply wants an enhanced way to play Metal Gear Solid 1, then Twin Snakes might seem pretty appealing to you, and from a gameplay perspective, it's hard to deny it's a technically superior experience, but if you've already played Metal Gear Solid 1, you're gonna be wondering why the entire game is now directed like fucking Shaolin soccer. Conversely, you've got something like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, going far beyond just being a simple remake of one of the greatest games of all time, by pulling the rug out from under you and acting as a meta sequel, being split into multiple parts going in a radically different direction than the original. A controversial change to be sure, especially with longtime fans, but one that many have warmed up to over the years and actually embraced and really seem to love. Inversely, always carry a thesaurus kids, the Resident Evil 3 remake is a massive piece of fucking dog shit. The game is just so insanely boring and strips away everything that made Resident Evil 3 unique, like all of the choices you have to make and the possibility that Nemesis could genuinely appear at any time and disrupt what you're doing, in exchange for a bunch of scripted sequences and some of the most forgiving mechanics in the series that end up turning the survival horror into a survival sleeper. Oh! Got him! Capcom's going out of business! Contrariwise, you have- wait, well, hold up. Contrariwise? That's not a real word, surely. Oh, fuck off. Contrariwise, you have the Resident Evil 4 remake that, while dialing back on some of the cheesiness of the original, though it does still have that in spades,
Let myself out.
still maintains a lot of what made the original Resident Evil 4 so great with its higher emphasis on action, while putting in an effort to make the game scarier and even touching up how certain characters like Sadler and especially Ashley were written. People's mileage and preferences will obviously vary, but it's clearly possible for a remake to make huge changes to the original that aren't widely considered bad or outright despised. A remake has the opportunity to take the original game and put its own spin on things, creating an entirely new experience that's still familiar but can ultimately stand on its own 2 feet. If remakes just copy the original's homework one-to-one, you'd have a very faithful and loyal experience, but at that point you begin to wonder what the point of a remake even is. And on that note, if you're gonna make a bunch of huge changes, then why not just make a new game entirely? Surely that would be more creatively fulfilling. What games even deserve remakes? What's the criteria for a game deserving a remake? Is it the game being old, janky, a buggy mess? How well is it aged? And if there's little point in remaking a game one-to-one, why is it that so many people get mad and pull out their pitchforks when a remake does make big changes? What is the point? Well, besides the obvious—
Here comes the money.
Nope, no, none of that, thank you. Besides the obvious fact that remakes sell really, really well, you can tell with quite a few remakes that there is more than just greed or cynicism fueling the production. Might be a bit of a hot take, feel free to disagree, but I'd argue that plenty of remakes do have good intentions, but are usually misguided. Many of these remakes, not all of them, but a good few of them, are evidently still full of passion and soul. Please do not hang me by my scrotum for saying the word soul, even if they fall short of the original in some areas. I think there is a genuine desire from many of these devs to just take a beloved game and do something new and exciting with it, or at the very least polish up a beloved title so that it can thrive with the jump in technology and be seen by a wider, newer audience. I don't think a specific game being deserving or not deserving of a remake is really much of a factor. Outside of money, I think there's still a genuine desire to either modernize a beloved title with a bold new direction or to be able to fulfill a creative vision that couldn't originally be accomplished. Now, whether a remake actually succeeds with these goals is up for debate. I don't think the original vision in Yakuza 2 was for Kiryu and Ryuji to fight with all of the aura depleted, but I've played enough remakes to get a general sense of which ones feel genuine with their approach and which ones are just looking for a quick buck. If it's something like the recent Persona remakes, for instance, interviews and generally just the amount of effort put into the presentation in general tell me that the people in charge do care about what they're making, even if they do stumble in some areas and lose a bit of the original appeal. Episode I guess was just Atlas completely overcorrecting based on fan backlash from the mid-2000s. If it's something like The Last of Us Part 1 on the other hand, it's like, okay dog, you can already play the remaster of this game from the previous console generation on current gen hardware. This doesn't change the fact that the PS5 still has no games. Modern Warfare 3? I'm LARPing, I don't play COD, I just wanted to make fun of Activision. However, if it's something like the Resident Evil 2 remake, it's hard to really deny the effort on display to completely modernize the classic survival horror from the original RE trilogy, and it's done so well that RE2 Remake is often considered the new gold standard for survival horror games. I think a big factor that decides whether or not people are going to be pleased or annoyed by many of the big changes in a lot of remakes, or even with remakes that try to remain as faithful as possible, is how available the original game is. Yep, we're gonna get into it, so strap in. Ubisoft, please relinquish custody of Rayman. I don't trust you to not delist Legends when the remake comes out, just let my boy succeed. Remakes often make very drastic changes, to the point that some games can be flat out unrecognizable compared to the originals. But at the end of the day, all is well, so long as the original game is left untouched and is perfectly playable on modern platforms. Remakes can be as daring as they want, but it's hard to rationalize to most people that they're disrespecting the original when the original is still there, existing side by side. If I can go to Asda and find the original and remake versions of RoboCop on DVD, then the same should generally apply to video games. I mean, it just makes sense, right? Which is why the point where a remake's changes become disrespectful to most people is when the remakes try to act like replacements for the original. This usually involves either refusing to re-release the original on modern platforms and just leaving it in the past to be forgotten about, or the option that seems to boil everyone's piss, delisting the original version of the game that's already available on modern platforms and having the more expensive and divisive remake replace it. This is especially scummy, and I've yet to hear a convincing argument in favor of ever doing this. There's nothing more disrespectful to a piece of art than tearing it down and withholding people's ability to view it at all. And the fear of it happening is always in the back of everyone's mind whenever they're watching the yearly Jeff Keighley slopathon and see a remake of one of their childhood video games get announced. The most recent remake I've seen catching flack for doing this is Yakuza Kiwami 3. I'll try not to go on a 5-hour long rant about this game here, because I'm already doing that on the side, God help me. But here's the deets. Kiwami 3 is a remake of Yakuza 3 that was already in hot water before it even released due to the game's underwhelming graphics, a full phone book of content from the original being cut, and a bunch of other things that I can't begin to get into. And at the last minute, Sega proceeds to shoot themselves in the foot once again by delisting Yakuza 3 Remastered from all digital storefronts and locking it behind a $130 bundle. Yeah, alright buddy, up yours. If you had to ask me, the deciding factor of whether I truly hate a remake or not usually comes from how available the original is. I despise RE3 Remake, let me tell ya, but with the original RE3 Nemesis being recently released on modern platforms, it helps to lessen the sting. I still think it's a bad remake, but at least the average consumer isn't railroaded into playing an inferior version of the game, and that's great. This policy also extends to remakes of games they actually do really like, such as Persona 3 Reload and Yakuza Kiwami 1 and 2. Despite their differences to the originals, I still think these versions of the game have value, and are still solid video games you can have a good time with. Helps that there's never been a definitive version of Persona 3, I guess. However, having access to the original versions of these games on modern hardware would go a long way in making people more receptive to the changes in these remakes, that they can be appreciated as good games that can stand on their own without replacing the original. I mean, hell, Ubisoft of all people haven't even delisted the original Black Flag, and Resynced has been out for a few weeks now. That's a surprising amount of restraint from them. I'd like to see that going forward, guys. They could always just delist the game after I release this video, but credit where it's due, they're doing better than Sega with this sort of thing. Or you can just do what Atlus, the funniest fucking company in the goddamn world, does by rushing out a bad remaster of the portable version of Persona 3 released for the PSP just mere months before announcing the remake of Persona 3 FES, which has been stuck on the PlayStation 2 for the past 20 years. I've got my eye on you bastards. I think Persona 4 Revival looks pretty good, but I'm gonna blow a gasket if Golden gets delisted because of it. You got one job, fellas. Okay, so moving on from all of that, there's one question I think a lot of people have wondered about recently, and I did touch upon it a few minutes ago. Has there ever been a necessary remake? Like a completely necessary remake? You know, a remake of a video game that actually justifies its existence beyond printing money? People seem to have a hard time determining what remakes are actually necessary or unnecessary. As said at the beginning, a large number of people are under the belief that every remake is unnecessary. As much as some people seem to be vehemently against this notion, video games are an art form, and painting over the original experiences and replacing them can feel disrespectful, regardless of how well the remake turns out. And even if the original is still available alongside the remake, you'll still have some people feeling like the remake is an insult to the original artistic vision. Now, that's definitely a much more purist take than I and a lot of other people have, but it's understandable. And I'm not gonna lie, I was struggling for examples to list for remakes that I thought were actually necessary. Not just for bringing the original to a new audience, but for justifying its existence by revitalizing its respective franchise, and its mere existence promising a bright future for the IP. I know it's cool to take pot shots at Nintendo nowadays, though I will say I've been more than satisfied with my Switch 2 compared to my PS5 that's been gathering dust for 3 years, but I feel confident in saying that Star Fox 2026 is not just a great game, it's an actually necessary remake simply because of the franchise it's in. I love Star Fox, always have and always will, and while I 100% agree with the people who are sick and tired of getting retellings of the exact same story without much innovation and just want a proper sequel at this point, you gotta understand that before 2026, Star Fox was in a really bad spot. Star Fox Fox Zero almost killed the franchise due to its poor quality and the fact it was already one of Nintendo's less popular franchises, releasing a new game on the fucking Wii U, and it's been a full decade without a new installment, if you don't count the release of the vaulted Star Fox 2 in 2017. Nintendo is clearly aware that Star Fox is a struggling IP, and simply porting Star Fox to the Switch was not going to be enough to save it, especially since it's already on the Switch, so it's not as if they didn't try. Star Fox had to be properly introduced to people again before they even think of doing a proper follow-up, and that alone makes the existence of Star Fox 2026 make complete sense to me. Couple this with Fox's appearance in the Mario Galaxy movie, an entire Nintendo Direct dedicated to showing off a new Star Fox game, and wouldn't you know it, the game actually sells well. And in addition to this, the game itself is good. Great even. It's natural to be disappointed in Star Fox getting yet another remake, or being mildly put off by the art direction. I'm still on the fence about that personally. But what we have here is a very faithful remake that still manages to have some tricks up its sleeve. It's the same story we all know, but with a much more cinematic approach with a bunch of new cutscenes, and even has some pretty great moments of characterization to help reintroduce the Star Fox crew while making them feel fresh. Fox still loves his dad, but has moments of resentment towards constantly being compared to him, or Peppy continuously bringing him up. And when Slippy crash lands on Titania, there's a standout scene of everyone standing up for him and going against General Pepper for suggesting he should be left behind. And gameplay-wise, I think this is probably the best that Star Fox has ever played and felt. The controls are buttery smooth, the sound design is fantastic, visually, regardless of how you feel about the character models, the game looks fantastic, and that soundtrack is simply divine. Again, it's disappointing that we still don't have a proper Star Fox sequel, but given the state the franchise was in before 2026, along with the fact that this remake is actually excellent and selling pretty well, and Nintendo clearly pushing for Star Fox to become a flagship series again, call me crazy, but Star Fox 2026 seems pretty darn necessary to me. I wouldn't be shocked if we see another Star Fox game soon. The franchise is doing better than ever, along with finally enjoying success on a successful console for a change. Unfortunately, Star Fox 2026 is just about the only recent example of a remake justifying its existence on all fronts. The only other similar example I can think of was the Crash Insane trilogy leading to the existence of Crash 4, but that was years ago. There is one other remake on the horizon though that has my attention, and I believe it might be capable of doing the same thing. Rayman Legends Retold. Rayman is also a long struggling franchise, and while I would love more than anything for a proper new installment, there are reportedly plans in place to revitalize the IP and make new games that depend entirely on the success of Legends Retold. In all fairness, Legends Retold is basically the closest thing to a new installment. It's considered a reimagined remake, with a bunch of differences between it and the original. And I can't lie, it does look great, and I'll be happy if it does succeed so we can get more Rayman games, but this is Ubisoft we're talking about, so I'm holding my breath. I know with all of these games, it's easy to question why companies have to basically hold a franchise at ransom for them to be given a proper new installment, but that's unfortunately just how the business works nowadays. It sucks, obviously, but there's not a whole lot we can really do about it. But to get back to my point, I think it's more than possible for a remake to be completely necessary. It's rare, damn rare, but remakes like this do exist. Now, remasters! Jesus fucking Christ. I have the same view on remasters as I do for remakes for the most part. They have the potential to bring new eyes to a long-established franchise which should still be available alongside the original version, blah 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 blah. Glad we're back on track. But if I'm being totally honest here, remasters have a much worse track record compared to remakes. And I think a lot of the hate towards remakes and remasters today specifically comes from just how many botched remasters of games we've had over the past few years. And it really blows my mind because you think it would be a simple task, right? The game has already been made, it's been available for years, the hard part has literally been done for you. Just bump up the resolution to 1080p or 4K if you're a fan of masochism, maybe spruce up a texture here or there without generative AI, fix some bugs, put the thing in stores. It should practically print money. But nowadays, there's like a 9 out of 10 chance that a remaster is gonna be an absolute mess, riddled with glitches and other graphical and technical problems that the original game simply didn't have. The best remasters are the ones that keep things simple, the ones that touch up the game both as substantially and as minimally as possible so that it looks cleaner and runs better, all with the intent of giving you a smoother experience. A good remaster should aim to be exactly how you remember the game looking in your head. The worst remasters are nearly all of them, actually. It's always a roll of the dice when a remaster has the words definitive or ultimate in the title. They're usually anything but, and then sometimes you get remasters that just should not exist. Last of Us Part 2 Remastered is a scam, but you already knew that. Everyone already knew that, and yet the game still made bank. There's a fucking motorcycle outside. I think what rubs many people the wrong way when it comes to remasters is that they are directly trying to replace the original by advertising themselves as the superior versions. A remake can be many things, a different interpretation, an experiment, all that jazz, but a remaster will typically always advertise itself as the superior replacement for the original game. So when the superior replacement ends up falling tragically short and the original game is pulled from stores, it's hard not to see why people would get mad at that. Once again though, the problem mostly lies with the industry's widespread lack of care for game preservation rather than the remaster's mere existence. If we, as consumers, simply had the choice to pick and choose what versions of the game we'd like to play, there wouldn't be any issue here. The problem is solved by the concept of consumer choice. So why limit what version of a game people choose to spend their money on? You can still safely criticize the remakes and remasters you dislike without the delisting of the original rubbing extra salt in the wound. And the people out there who actually want to play and even prefer these remakes can still choose to seek out and play the originals whenever they please. This should be the norm. However, there's a reason why things will likely never be this way, and it's a simple fact that I see a lot of people ignore when they're trashing remakes and remasters online, despite it answering a majority of their questions. It's as simple as this. The average consumer, not tuned into internet discourse, does not want to play old video games. I know, it sounds crazy, but unfortunately that is the truth. As tough as it is to admit, the majority of gamers do not want to play older games or games they perceive as old-looking. Why else do you think we almost never see straight-up ports of old games these days? It's far easier to just port an old game onto modern consoles than it is to remaster or remake the game entirely, so why don't companies just do that? Because ports of old games simply don't sell well in today's market, or at least they fail to meet the often staggeringly unrealistic sales expectations that corporations have for all of their video game releases. Have you seen the average sales report for Square Enix? I don't know what could possibly satisfy these guys at this point, but you know what's almost guaranteed to sell well? Remakes and remasters. It's an irrefutable fact that remakes and remasters of old games tend to sell very well. Nostalgic fans are chomping at the bit for an experience that recaptures the magic of their first time playing the original, and brand new players see these new releases as their way to finally get into a series they've been interested in for a while. Now with the added promise of new quality of life features, less jank, and higher fidelity graphics, that promise of here's a critically acclaimed game, we made it even better, matters a lot to the average consumer. Everyone wants to try a version of an already beloved game that's been made quote-unquote better. That sounds like a worthwhile purchase. Social media debates about remakes and remasters may be heated and largely skewed negative, but I think it's easy to forget just how small social media is in the grand scheme of things. The average consumer who isn't arguing about things online is more likely to buy a modern remake of a video game than the original version, and that's the sad truth, that's reality. There's very little incentive for companies to bend the knee to the vocal minority and port over a bunch of old games on the cheap, most likely still at a loss. Now, to be frank, most companies could f***ing absolutely do it and sell these games at a loss and still be fine, but given companies aren't in the business of losing money at all in order to not upset investors, that's just not gonna happen. Remakes and remasters will continue to be seen as the logical way forward for big companies, so long as they keep making money. It's as simple as that. The devs can approach these projects with good intentions, as previously stated, and maybe even crank out a solid video game, but the mere existence of a remake in development is just easy money. With that all being laid out, however, one question remains. Why do people want remakes and remasters? Why is it that so many people wish for and continue to spend money on increasingly expensive remakes and remasters of games they've already played in the past? Especially when a simple port would surely do the trick, right? And should companies really keep listening to these people? Financially, it makes complete sense to keep listening to the droves of people who keep buying your games, but is this really healthy for the industry? Well, there's an obvious answer to why people want remakes and remasters, besides nostalgia, of course. While it's not exactly the most logical thing in the world, a lot of people want remakes and remasters simply for comfort. They want to experience something, a game they've already played a bunch of times that they know they're going to like, only now it has some new bells and whistles. Sure, having the original game be available on modern platforms is great and all, but the promise of substantial new additions, the promise of better visuals, the promise of fulfilling the potential the original game couldn't quite reach. There's a sense of comfort to be had in experiencing something you know you'll enjoy, but with the promise of it being made ever so slightly better. In theory, of course, we know the track record certainly stands in the way of this ideal, but it's not hard to understand why a lot of people want remakes and remasters of their most beloved games. Especially since I think many average consumers are aware that people have an aversion to older looking games, and that a remake or remaster can help make them feel new again. Most people out there are demanding remakes and remasters instead of simple ports, despite that basically solving the core issue for them. I don't think there's anything wrong with just wanting to have a comfy and cozy time playing something you know is made for you. I actually had a similar experience when Persona 3 Reload came out. I love every version of Persona 3, and Reload, while not the most ideal remake and definitely skimped out on some defining aspects of the original was ticking all of the right boxes for me to the point I knew I was going to enjoy it. I'm having a similar feeling right now with the Persona 4 remake, and I must stress that I'm usually against most remakes and remasters, but like I said at the beginning, when a certain remake or remaster gets its hooks in you, that desire to complain about how needless their existence is almost entirely dissipates. I remember a lot of people being vocally against the idea of any kind of Fallout remaster, but then Bethesda went and announced remasters of Free and New Vegas alongside announcing Fallout 5 and a bunch of promising announcements for their other franchises, and now I'm seeing a lot of people excited for them. But again, should the industry really be listening to these people? Is it right that hundreds of millions of dollars are poured into remakes of old games all across the industry? An industry where every other week there's an announcement from one of the bigger companies saying they've laid off a substantial number of their employees? Is this really healthy? No, it's definitely not. But what can we do exactly? Stop buying remakes and remasters? Well, that's easy for me to say and do, and probably you as well. But so long as the average consumer keeps buying remakes and remasters, they'll continue to be made. So let's focus on what we actually have in front of us. In conclusion, I don't hate remakes and remasters. There is absolutely some value in the remakes and remasters that either intend to be no-nonsense improvements, the ones that seek to completely transform the game into an all-new experience without playing it safe, and the ones that revitalize a struggling IP with the promise of a bright future. However, the main thing I care about, the core point of contention for me, is whether the original experiences are being preserved and can be played on modern platforms for years to come. I think a lot of the anger and frustration towards remakes and remasters is this one specific point, with companies believing the remakes and remasters are adequate or superior replacements for the originals and actively preventing you from playing them. The anger and nuclear takes I see on remakes are completely understandable, but at the same time, I do appreciate that the average consumer just wants to buy and play whatever makes them happy, and there's not much you can really say in the way of that. Which is why I think the war on remakes and remasters should instead be steered more towards video game preservation rather than cursing all remakes and remasters entirely. Remakes and remasters can still stand on their own as high-quality games that most people can still have a great time with and can even have many of their own distinct qualities that help set them apart from the originals in ways that aren't insulting to the original intent, but only if the originals are still made widely available. It's completely feasible for companies to do this. Nintendo's online bonuses let you play a wide variety of old games from their ginormous catalog. Sony sometimes likes to throw people bones and see what happens. Sometimes, and Xbox has Game Pass. I want to be optimistic and say it's probably a matter of time before one of your favorite games from a previous console generation is finally made available again. It's just a bit sad that you might have to get a remake or remaster first.